Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, you had a good day or having a good day. We are continuing our our class on the laws of Pesach. And if we get this set up correctly, we'll be good to go. So, we discussed yesterday about the night of Pesach and various different things that have to be at the Seder plate. We spoke about the Zecher, the remembrance for the Pesach offering, the remembrance for the general holiday offering that existed by every holiday. And today we're going to get a little bit more in details of what happens at the actual Seder. I'm just going to get this phone here because it's somehow putting me on the side. Okay. The wine, as mentioned, should be red wine for the Seder. It's best to use red wine as long as the wine is as good or as kosher, and so on. Generally speaking, red wine is your preferred wine for the Seder. Truth be told, for Kiddush on Shabbos, it's also the preferred wine. You want to use red wine. If, however, the white wine is more kosher or it is more special, better wine, then you could. But for Pesach, really, really go out of your way, try to find red wine. The reason for it is there's a verse that expresses that red wine is a richer wine, and that's why we do it. There were times in history when red wine was associated with blood, and the nations that were trying to accuse the Jewish people with the ludicrous accusations that we use Christian blood for our matzah, and look, the wine is red, so either that it has blood in it or that we are remembering the blood. So there were places and times in history where we didn't use red wine for that reason, which is perfectly understandable and perfectly okay. But generally, you want to have red wine. Now, you want that wine to be enough for every person to have 4 cups. A cup of wine for the Seder is a revius, which is about 3.5 ounces. Now, you could get smaller cups because there is, as we'll learn, there's a concept of having the full cup of wine when you drink each one of the 4 cups to finish the whole cup, whether it's wine or if you can't do wine, grape juice is fine, but that is a concept as well. The Shulchan Aruch tells us that somebody else, an attendant or a helper, should pour the wine for you. Although the Chabad custom is we're not careful about that, many people have this custom where they have someone else pour them the wine. And it's the same idea of cherus, of royalty, of freedom. Someone else is actually doing the pouring for you. Now, remind everyone at your Seder that they should drink the entire cup, at least a revius. It's not enough just to take a sip. It's not even enough just to have majority of the cup. You have to have at least 3.5 ounces of the cup, just about. And if not that, at least, if you could, it's best to have the entire cup of wine in each sitting, at each interval, each one of the 4 cups. Now, when you drink the wine, you should have in mind that I am fulfilling the mitzvah. It's a rabbinic enactment, but the mitzvah of drinking 4 cups. So you're focusing as you drink it. This is cup 1, cup 2, and so on. And the same is when you talk about the going out of Mitzrayim. Have in mind, I am fulfilling a mitzvah. Do it with intent. And the same thing is when you eat the matzah. The truth is that unlike many mitzvahs which are time-bound, women are required to have the matzah, have the wine, and talk about or listen to the talking about going out of Mitzrayim. Generally speaking, we say that any mitzvah which is limited to a time, okay, tefillin has a time mitzvah, it has to be during the day. Tzitzis is a time, it must be during the day. And many, many other mitzvahs. Mitzvahs which have to be done during the day, women are exempt from. However, there are exceptions, and one of them is the mitzvah of matzah and wine or grape juice at the Seder. Women should do that. So when you're leading the Seder, remind everyone, have in mind you're doing a mitzvah. After Kiddush is done, And the wine, by the way, again, is drunk, when you lean to your left. Whether you're a righty or a lefty, you will lean to the left side. It's a sign of freedom. Women are not required in the haseba, in the reclining when they drink the wine, but we do it as a sign of freedom, as a sign of royalty. After that's done, we have the second step of the Seder, and that is urchatz. We wash our hands. Now, unlike when you wash your hands during the year for bread, or on Pesach for matzah, we don't make a blessing. Because this washing of the hands is not as a preparation for the matzah or bread as it would be during the year. Rather, it's for two reasons. Number one, we want to perk the curiosity of the children. And when they see that we're getting up to wash, normally that means we're going to eat. We don't start eating it. As we see, the next thing we do is karpas. Take a piece of onion or a potato or a celery, depending on your custom, and you dip it in salt water. So when we get up and we wash, and we don't make a blessing, which is different than the rest of the year, children start to ask questions. What's going on? Why is this night different from all the other nights? And then we say, hey, that's exactly what I was waiting for you to say. And you could begin the conversation about we were slaves in Egypt, and Hashem took us out, and if not for them, we'd still be slaves now. But the point is to involve the children. And you do that by getting them to ask questions. It's much more effective if they're asking you and you're answering, if they're curious and you're satisfying, rather than, by the way, I got information to tell you. You must know or you must listen. So we do certain things that are different tonight than any other night. So the second thing after Kiddush, we get up, we wash our hands, we don't make a bracha, and then we sit down and we cut a piece of, let's say it's the onion. Each person should have less than a kezayis. Don't have the full amount, which is going to require you to make an after blessing. You dip that into the salt water, you make a blessing hadama, and when you make the blessing, the bracha, you have in mind that this bracha, hadama, which is the blessing that's made over vegetables, should apply for the maror as well. Even though the maror is going to be after you wash from matzah, maror is not normally something which you eat plain at a meal. It's not part of the meal. It would require its own blessing. And therefore, when you make the bracha hadama now, you have in mind that this bracha should include the maror which you'll eat later. It's an interesting concept in its own that we're careful not to make extra blessings. Saying Hashem's name in vain is a very drastic thing. We're careful about that. And even when it comes to blessings, you don't make a blessing if you don't have to. I mean, a blessing over food, etc. You don't just do it extra. If it's eating several items of the same blessing together, it's included. Just have in mind that it goes for that. We then take the matzah and we divide the middle matzah. You literally break it in two parts. The smaller portion goes in, you leave it between the two matzahs, the top and the bottom. Remember we said yesterday that there's three matzahs. There is Bisra, Levi, and Kohen. The Levi matzah gets broken. And the larger piece we put away for the Afikaiman. The Chabad custom is to take that larger piece of matzah and break it into 5 pieces. 5 Kabbalistically represents dinim, severity, judgment, strictness, and so on and so forth. And by breaking the matzah, you're breaking severity, you're breaking, I'll use the word negativity, and bringing that into sweetness, to something which is good. So it's a beautiful minhag and it has a lot of significance behind it. But the main thing is you put away that matzah for the Afikaiman, because if you don't have it for the Afikaiman, you cannot finish your Seder without that. Some have a custom that children steal the Afikaiman. They take that middle matzah, that piece of the middle matzah that you put away, they hide it. And then you have to either find it or bargain, ask, deal and wheel and deal with the children, where's the Afikaiman? And then you offer them a present and so on. And the reason why they do that is, again, to involve the child in the process. They should look forward to the Seder. They should ask questions at the Seder. They should enjoy it. Imagine every year on Pesach, you have a chance to ask for some kind of gift, something that you want, the prize. The Hasidic tradition, however, is not to do that. And the reason is because the Seder is all about education, and we don't want to educate the concept of stealing. This, although it's part of the plan, it's part of the game, if you will, nonetheless, it is stealing. And we're stealing the matzah, we're hiding the matzah, we're taking away the matzah. It's, again, it is a Jewish, very common thing, but in Hasidic circles, it's not done because we don't want to educate about stealing, that it's in some way permissible. Others, what they do is they hide the afikoman, and the child has to go find it. In our family, we get presents or give presents for saying the manishtana. So there's still something to look forward to in that regard. It's still fun. You asked the 4 questions. You asked it well. You get a gift on Chol Hamoed. You get to go to the store. Back in the day, we used to go to Toys R Us, which I don't think is any longer with us. But we go to Toys R Us and get a prize for the manishtana. But the point is that we don't want to steal afikoman. But nonetheless, put away that piece of matzah for the afikoman. Now, at this point of the Seder, we did 3 steps already. Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, and Yachatz. Sorry, 4. Now, the next item is Magid. Magid means to relate, to retell. We're going to tell the story of Pesach, which is really one of the main mitzvahs of the Seder, is to relate the story of slavery and Exodus. Now, we do that over matzah. So the matzah normally at the Seder is covered, but before you start Magid, you uncover the matzah. You lift a little bit the cover that's there, either fully, or at least the matzah should stick out a little bit, so that the Haggadah is said over, next to, about the matzah. Now the very next section that we say is Heilach Ma'anya. We talk about poor man's bread. And we say this is the poor man's bread that our ancestors have eaten in Mitzrayim. So it's interesting that tonight at the Seder we have a duality. On the one hand, you have a Seder, a food, a matzah, which is poor man's bread. It's the bread which we ate in Egypt. The reason why they had matzah in Egypt, just as the food that they ate, was because it's a food which satisfies for a long time. Meaning when you eat matzah, you stay full for longer periods of time than bread. It's cheaper. It's quick to bake. So they gave that to slaves. It's slaves' food. At the same time, it represents freedom. We ran out of Egypt. We were fleeing. We had no time to properly bake bread. So we ended up with matzah. When we eat the matzah at the Seder, we lean to our left because we're expressing royalty, freedom. So the very same matzah has the duality to it. On the one hand, it is slaves' bread. On the other hand, it's food of freedom. And so many things in life are like that. Depending where you're at, depending on your perspective, depending on your attitude, this could be a poor man's bread. It could be something of affliction, of difficulty, of challenge. And at the very same time, or not the same time, the very item can be something positive, something representing liberty, something representing freedom, depending what side of the line of Egypt you're in, and depending on your perspective. But that's as far as matzah goes. We then fill the second cup of wine. Now, why do we fill it now? Again, we want the child to ask questions. And when you fill the cup of matzah, the cup of wine, wow, it's been a long day. When you fill the cup of wine and you don't drink it, hey, what's going on? When are we going to drink this? Wait, we got to say the Haggadah. We're going to say the Haggadah. It's going to allow us the opportunity to talk about the story, and get them involved. After that's filled, children ask manishtana. If there's no child there, then anyone could ask the manishtana. Ask the youngest person there, or someone else at the Seder, or a spouse. Anyone could ask, and frankly, ask the questions yourself. The truth is that after the Seder after manishtana is said by the children, we all say the manishtana ourselves. We're asking our Father in heaven these questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? And we're also saying the ultimate question of why are we in exile? When can we finally celebrate true freedom? Freedom from any type of problems, issues, difficulties. This year it has special meaning with everything that's going on. But the concept of asking questions as children to fathers is to all of us, to our Father in heaven, to Hashem. So then Manashtana is said. After Manashtana is said, we say the Haggadah, the story of slavery in Egypt. Now, the Haggadah is written primarily in Hebrew, and you have to understand what you're saying. So if you don't understand it, say it in a language that you do understand. Read the English Haggadah, read the Russian Haggadah. The person that's leading the Seder should explain certain parts. It's not as much of a prayer, primarily, as it is a retelling the story. You have to understand what you're saying. You have to understand what you're listening to. So doing the Haggadah at the Seder should be in a language that you understand. Now, when it comes time to drink the wine or to lift the wine, you cover the matzah. Remember, we uncovered the matzah before we started the Haggadah, because the Haggadah should be said over matzah. We cover it every time we fill up the wine or if we lift the wine. And the reason is not to embarrass the bread, the matzah. In Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, in Torah, shaming is not just to people, it's also to objects. There's a certain respect that we have. Bread is the first blessing. Bread is number one. That's what you have first. It comes before wine. However, in certain cases, for example, on Shabbos, you need to make kiddush before you can eat. So we end up having the wine first, technically, before the challah. That's why we cover the challah during kiddush. So the challah shouldn't be embarrassed that we're bypassing it and doing the wine. And the same thing is at the Seder. The matzah is covered every time you lift the wine because you don't want to shame the matzah. And if we're careful about shaming food, objects, things which don't seem to have any type of feelings or thoughts, how much more so we should be careful when it comes to people. Not shaming anyone else, being sensitive to them. But that's the idea of covering the matzah when you lift the cup of wine. There's another reason that we do this, and that is because in Hasidic circles, we're very careful not to get the matzah wet in any way. And if you're going to have the wine and the matzah is uncovered, you run the risk of, it's not if, but it's when, a little bit of the wine will spill, it'll get onto the matzah, and it causes a problem. So for those two reasons, not shaming the matzah and not causing the matzah to get wet, we cover the matzah when we lift the wine. Now, there are different customs about the following. During the Haggadah, we talk about certain parts of the Seder plate. Like, this is the matzah that we're eating because our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. This is the maror because they bittered our lives, and so on and so forth. And some people, their tradition is they lift the actual item they're going to use. They pick it up. Here's the matzah, they show it around. The maror, they lift it up. Our custom is just to put our hand over it. We don't even touch it per se. We put on top of it, you can touch it lightly. However, when it comes to the shank bone, the tzroya, the piece of chicken bone, which is used to remember the Pesach offering, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, do not lift it. Because you don't want to designate this piece of chicken bone for a carbon. Although it's not a literal carbon, but imagine someone comes and says, hey, this piece of meat is a sacrifice for the temple. It carries strong spiritual significance. And then you can't eat it for anything else, and it's a problem to dispose of it. So he says, be careful, don't lift this piece of chicken and declare this is an offering, this is a sacrifice. Which again shows us the power of words, especially in regards to sacrifices, to offerings. After we finish the whole Haggadah, at the end, not the whole, but the first section, at the end we have the first part of the Hallel, the praise. We're praising Hashem for the great miracles of taking us out of Egypt, the miracles that happened as we split the sea, tremendous miracles that we're thankful for on this night. And then we lift the second cup. It's the same cup that we filled right before Manashtana, which we didn't drink then because we wanted the children to ask questions. That's why we filled it. We don't drink it because we want to say part of the Hallel over this cup of wine. And then we lean to our left and we drink it. The cup of wine, it's important that it's filled to the brim. It actually should overflow a little bit. It's a sign of royalty when the wine overflows. You don't got to go crazy. You don't have to put in tons of wine, but it should spill over a little bit. And that little wine that spills over is so important that during the Haggadah, you're lifting the cup, you're putting down the cup, lift it for Vahisha Amda. We also pour out certain parts of little drops of wine when certain parts of the Haggadah are said. For example, when we say that about the 10 plagues, we pour out some of the wine. So because of all these pourings of the wine is not full. The cup's not filled anymore. And therefore, we need to refill the wine before you actually go on with the Haggadah to make sure that you're saying it on a full becher of wine. Now, as mentioned, because some have the custom, and it's a good idea, not just to have a revius, 3.5 ounces, but to actually drink the entire cup of wine, be sure that A, it's at least 4 ounces, 3.5 ounces, and B, it should be also, you may not want a huge becher because you have to drink it every time. And for those, if it's a 16-ounce becher, it's more like a washing cup than a drinking cup. But point is, plan accordingly. Friends, we're going to conclude today's lesson right here. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Please join for our bedtime story, which there's no telling exactly when it is, but probably around 8:30. And I encourage you also to log in. We're going to try to get this on Facebook, but it's on Zoom for a special class by Moshe Moskowitz on thoughts about Pesach and a very special edition, the plague of 1792 with Rabbi Akiva Eger. Lock it in, share, like, subscribe, and thank you very much for watching. Good evening, everyone.